All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back, I should say, to the Podcast Engineering Show. My name is Chris Curran. And of course, on this show, we talk about podcast production techniques and tips. And we talk about it at the highest professional level. So most people who listen to the show actually produce podcasts for a living, and they earn a great income because they know how to produce podcasts professionally. And that's what I do. And so this show is about me and my guests teaching you the hardcore audio production stuff of podcasting, because most podcasters don't know really anything about audio production when they start. So there's a lot to learn, and that's what this show is all about. This is a special episode. I wanted to do a midsummer podcast evaluation episode because in the summer, well, at least this summer for me, I feel like I'm taking the summer off. I mean, I don't think I've put out an episode in maybe 4-5 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. I don't know. I've been averaging every other week for about the past year. So anyhow, summertime, depending on your life, you can sort of hit the dog days of summer and kind of feel lazy and not, maybe fall out of your groove. And so what I wanted to do is cover a lot of topics in this episode of sort of evaluating your show, sort of like stepping back and just evaluating a bunch of different aspects of your show. Some of it audio production related, but most of it not. Most of it is just, you'll see there's a bunch of other topics like, including, coming up with a new segment to include in your show, maybe change your marketing and a lot of stuff. So we're going to cover that, and that's going to be really fun. And here to discuss that with me is Max Flight. Hi, Max. Welcome back.
Chris, it's good to be speaking with you.
Yeah, happy to have you back. I mean, you're one of the special previous guests of the show because you were on episode 20, you were on episode 39, and right. You and I have kept in touch, and I'm really happy about that. Just through email, like every 6 or 12 months or something. It's just like, hey, how you doing? Whatever. I really appreciate that, Max.
Yeah, and Chris, that's one of the qualities that I like in you is that you're not the sort of person that wants to sell a course and then after the sale is made, you're onto something else. You maintain relationships with people, and most of all, you're just happy to help people sound great.
Yeah, I love it. I just love it. Okay, so what we're gonna do, what I want to do with you first, Max, is first I'm going to introduce you properly in a second, but then I do, because normally when I have a guest on the show, we go through their whole equipment and workflow and software, and I really cover. I get a good overview of their entire production process, and it's really helpful. So we've done that with you twice already. So today we're going to do it again, though, but probably more briefly because you have changed a bunch of stuff in your production and your equipment. So we're definitely going to talk about that first. So let's talk about that and get all that out of the way. But first, Max Flight, you are the host of Airplane Geeks. That's a cool podcast. If anyone hasn't heard it, definitely check it out. Airplane Geeks. I'm going to put the link in the description as well. You also have a spin-off of that show called the UAV Digest. That started Airplane Geeks started in 2008, and you now have 700 episodes. Dude, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. It's amazing. I don't know how I've done it.
Yeah, and the UAV Digest from 2013 when you started, now you have over 400 episodes. And like I said, you were previously on episodes 20 and 39 of this show. So, and I'll link to all this in the show notes, but really happy to talk about what you've been doing it's what, 3-4 years since we talked on the show?
I think almost 5.
Oh, wow. All right. And one of the things that's prompted this whole us speaking again about your production is because you sold one of your pieces of gear that, audio guys like you and me, we're really psyched about gear. And you had a warm audio MixPre that you were using for a while, right?
Yes. I've been kind of downsizing. My equipment has changed over the years, And I finally, looked at all this equipment piled around and realized that, you know what, I have enough stuff, or I had enough stuff for probably 5 podcasters to be fully outfitted. You change equipment, you change mics, and so I've been kind of downsizing that. But other big changes, I've moved to Riverside.fm for recording episodes. That's been a big change. I'm also using a Sound Devices MixPre instead of the mixer that I had used for years. And I've also got a different studio, which is sort of mixed results.
Okay, so let's step through that. So first of all, you were using Skype and doing, multi-enders, the double ender kind of thing with multiple people.
Right. I always had all the co-hosts anyway recording themselves locally.
Right.
And on rare occasions where I would have the guest record themselves locally, but that was clearly the exception. Most guests, you can't handle that sort of a thing. But it just allowed us to avoid the Skype dropouts, things like that. So, for years I had been praying for a service that would, provide that kind of functionality. And there are several now, of course.
Yeah, and Riverside's a great one. And Squadcast is also good. Zencastr is also very good. And there are others that are good too. There's a lot now. It like you, I'm happy to see all of these platforms come out, but Riverside is definitely good. And the coolest thing about Riverside and others is that all that double ender recording and all the post-production of lining it up and all that, it's just gone. You just record with Riverside and you download all the individual tracks and just put them into your software, right?
Exactly. And it's also super convenient for guests who oftentimes have zero audio knowledge. So we do coach them through, I guess I should say,
right,
through the process. Always have a sound check in advance, not the day that we're doing the recording.
Nice.
To check out their microphone, whatever they're using for mic and their location, and that's where we have an opportunity to say, well, that built-in laptop mic that's 2 feet away from your mouth, maybe we can, improve that slightly. So we try to do all that in advance, which is very, very helpful. But the big thing is it's so easy for them. You just give the guest a link, they click on it, just got to make sure they have the proper browser, and they don't have to do anything really. It's very easy for the guest.
Yeah, they just basically choose their input and output device in Riverside.
Yeah.
Or any other platform that you would use, and then boom, you just hit record. All right, and then one other thing that you changed is that you used to use a Behringer mixer, which you got in 2009, but now you're just using the MixPre, and it just makes total sense for certain applications. You don't need like a mixing board. You can get the same functionality that's in the mixing board. You can get that in a MixPre, a Sound Devices MixPre-3 or MixPre-6 or MixPre 10T. And the quality of the MixPre is just so much better than the average mixer, right?
Yes, it is. And my mixer, it kind of became my entertainment center. In the studio, I had 2 laptops hooked up to it using Behringer sound cards, basically. I had powered speakers hooked up to it. It was really kind of my complete entertainment center. I could do podcast production. I could watch videos. I could do this, whatever I was doing. But it was kind of a complicated setup. And I got to the point where I said, I don't really need all that. It's like you say, the single device, a device that acts as a recorder and as an audio interface at the same time. It was just huge. And I use that when I'm recording mobile as well. So when I'm away from the studio, I don't have to bring a mixer. I don't have to bring anything other than the MixPre and a mic and a laptop, basically.
Yeah, and the one that you bring on location, I saw in your notes here that you bought a MixPre 3, but it's a second generation, a Gen 2.
Right.
And we all know why you got that, because you're at these air shows.
Yeah.
And planes are flying by at a bazillion dB. And so explain why you got that and the 32-bit float and everything.
So yeah, the one reason was the smaller size. So for field recordings, it was kind of more convenient. But the big driver for me was that 32-bit float recording capability. And with 32-bit float, that can handle enormous dynamic range, almost to the point where you don't even have to set the levels. It just has so much dynamic range. You can pick whatever you want almost, and it'll capture it well. It's really only limited by the dynamic range of the microphone, I think. So that's why I got that second MixPre. I know, a little bit extravagant, but hey, I'm a gearhead.
Yeah, well, and again, extravagant, but let's be honest. I mean, first of all, you're at these air shows, you're out live recording. I mean, first of all, Sound Devices, I think what they're mainly known for is field recording equipment. That's what these MixPres really are, in a sense. But it's great. So for all of you listening who don't go to air shows and record audio, one of the benefits of 32-bit float, or I should say another practical use case of 32-bit float, is if you're ever doing on like man on the street recording, you're going around with a microphone to different people on the street, and you know what happens if you have a microphone on the street. Like, some people stay 10 feet away from the microphone and talk. Other people will actually like grab it and like yell right into it. So the dynamic range of what you're going to capture on the street is enormous as well. So that's another great use case for 32-bit float that I just wanted to point out.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it is kind of a limited universe of use cases for the thing. Almost everybody doesn't need 32-bit float, but sometimes there's, the situation comes up where, it would be great to have. So
yeah,
so I've got it.
And we should just quickly mention that one of the main features of the Sound Devices MixPre series are the mic preamps. They're just literally outstanding. They have more than enough gain. You don't need you don't need any gain boosters and all that. It's just, and that's, so how do you feel about the MixPres?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I sold my Warm Audio preamp, and that's why my FET head hasn't been used in several years. I don't need that stuff anymore because the preamps are so good. They're clean. They have a lot of gain. And we're kind of starting to sound like a commercial for MixPres, but they are nice devices, Yeah. They are nice. It's not the only thing I use. Sometimes I use a Zoom H5 for field recordings, hook the microphone up to that. I have a Sennheiser interview mic that I will frequently use. I also use that mic with the MixPre, but sometimes the Zoom H5 is a nice device to use for that.
Mm. So you mentioned, and I wanted to actually cover this earlier, but the Warm Audio MixPre that you ended up selling recently, because again, you got the MixPre, so you didn't really need it anymore. So what happened? You just sort of just had it laying on the desk for like a year and a half, and then finally you're like, well, I guess I can sell it.
Exactly. I always loved that piece of equipment. I just loved using it. I liked everything about it, and it was literally just sitting on a shelf, unused. And I figured, well, it could be a backup device or, something. But I just finally got to the point where I'm not using it. Somebody else will enjoy using it. So I'd rather just, move it on to the next owner.
Right. Yeah, it's hard for someone like me to sell old gear. I have a bunch of old gear, and it's like again, it's a mental thing, because I know I don't need all of it, and I probably will never, like most of the gear I have, I probably will never even use again. Like literally, like 20 years from now, it's going to be like, well, why do you have 4 Focusrite 2i2s still? And then at that point, you just throw them out. But anyway, that's just like a recording engineer. It's hard to sell stuff and get rid of stuff because you just might need it someday. And plus, honestly, I'm going to sell some interfaces. How much am I going to get for it? How much of a headache is it to sell it? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And, some of the equipment that I've let go, I've donated or given to other people. I can think of a college student who was, especially during the height of COVID, getting their education from home and over Zoom and so forth, and didn't have a microphone really that worked very well. So I said, well, here I've got this dynamic mic, I've got this this extra interface. Here, why don't you take them and then you can use them for your classes? And he was delighted. So sometimes, disposing of equipment by donating it or giving it to somebody that can use it that maybe can't afford it or doesn't even know that how much they would enjoy the equipment that you have that's surplus. It makes you feel good, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I should really do that. I think I will. But I don't know how I'm going to do it though. Anyway, I'll figure it out. But that's a great idea. Thank you for that idea, because exactly, if someone can get use from it, that makes total sense. Okay, before we move on through the equipment list, you are now playing sound clips through Riverside instead of an old soundboard that you had. So I did know that you can load clips into. Maybe I didn't know this. So talk to me about how you do that inside Riverside.
Yeah, there's a tab in there. I think it's called Media that you can use to do this. Previously, with the mixer, that was another input. I had an iPad that was connected to the mixer, and I had a soundboard application on the iPad that I would use. Some of them are just clips. Also, I have a lot of contributors who create their own content, develop recordings that we include as segments on the show, and so I have those as well. So those can run 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, sometimes even 30 minutes worth of material. And with Riverside, you can preload that into Riverside, and it gives you basically a soundboard kind of interface with buttons for all the clips and recordings. They have some built-in recordings and transitions and things. But anyway, you can upload your material, and then you just tap it or click it with a mouse as the show is progressing, and it plays into Riverside. It's perfect.
That's cool. Do you know if Riverside records that audio?
It does. In fact, it'll put that on a separate track.
That's awesome.
So you get a track for each participant, and you'll get a separate track for all of the pre-recorded clips or segments or whatever you have.
See, that's one thing with Riverside I've always noticed. They, guys like us will be like, "Oh, it would be cool if it did that," and then it's like, "Oh, it does that. That they did that. It already does that." It's like, I don't know. They just seem to. I don't know who they're, who they're talking, like if it's just people on their inner team who understand audio really well, or if they have some people coming in from outside as consultants or something. But whatever they're doing, it's almost in all cases that I can remember that it's like they're just making the right moves and adding the right little things. It's just, it's nice to see that.
It's very nice to see that, and that's pretty much exactly why I switched from a different service previously to Riverside. Now, they do have a Slack group for some of their, I forget what the term is, some of their high usage customers, I guess, where they have different channels for things like suggestions, feature suggestions, or issues, bugs that have come up, or that sort of a thing. So they maintain this really good, daily working relationship with some of their customers. But they really do have a corporate, I'll say corporate, I don't know if that really applies, but a corporate mindset, a company mindset of continuous improvement and listening to the people that use the service. And honestly, occasionally there are glitches, but they address them and they come up.
Right.
And we have backup recordings anyway, so
right.
That covers it. Earlier this week, I had a situation where one of my co-hosts, in his recording, I noticed it was shorter than everybody else's recording. That didn't make sense. Then I found out that there was about 10 seconds that was just gone out of their recording. which was kind of unusual. So because I have a backup recording that I'm running on the MixPre, I just copied my local recording of them, those 10 seconds, and just pasted them over the the missing part, and good to go.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right, so we're going to continue through your equipment list and software and services. We've talked about a bunch of them, but I didn't mention yet, and I just tapped my mic stand. I don't know if you heard that, but so I am not at home. I am somewhere else, and I have kind of a different setup. Right now, I'm speaking into a Sennheiser E835 microphone, and it's going straight into my MixPre. So I'm not using any compressor or channel strip or nothing. And I'm in a place where I'm like sitting right in the dining room. Right behind me is the kitchen, and almost the first thing in the kitchen is the refrigerator. And also the air conditioning unit here is pretty loud. So I think the air conditioner is running now, and sometimes so my point is I'm in a high noise environment, so I don't know what this is going to look like or sound like in post. But obviously, if there's a little too much background noise, I will use RX to remove some. But the way I'm going to do that is, like, if the refrigerator that comes on behind me, that's probably going to be pretty loud into the microphone. So hopefully in RX, I'll be able to literally see with my eyes when the refrigerator came on and when it went off. If it did. Right now, it's not on. But anyhow, I just wanted to mention that's my setup right now. So why don't you quickly tell us your mic and your setup right now?
I'm also not in the studio, actually. I'm in a really large room that tends to have a little bit of echoes. I'm visiting someone at the moment, but I'm surrounded by all the pillows and cushions that I could find in this house to try to create as much of a cocoon as I could. And you mentioned the 835, the Sennheiser. I have 4 of those, and I use those for panel discussions. When I'm doing that kind of recording, it's a great mic. But I'm speaking into a Heil PR40, which I got 2009. Wow. I got that when I didn't know that Leo Laporte used a Heil PR40. Okay. So, because a lot of people, especially in those days, who bought the PR40, got them because, well, Leo Laporte uses them, and so it must be good. So I got it independently. But so I've got that. I actually run 2 laptops typically when I can, which is kind of bizarre. But so I have one laptop that's running Riverside, and it's not running anything else. It's just Riverside, and then that's the MacBook Pro, and then I have a Dell Windows 10 machine that I use for notes, and if I need to, click on something, check out something during the recording process. But so the Heil PR40 into the Sound Devices MixPre, which is connected to the MacBook Pro via a USB-C cable. And then I have just this little Logitech webcam that I'm using. And that's it. That's it where I am right now.
Nice. And so, by the way, the fridge is on now. Let's pause a moment for the refrigerator. All right. Anyway. Okay. So you got your Heil PR40 going into the MixPre, going into your MacBook Pro. And obviously on the MacBook Pro, you have your browser open. We are connected through Riverside. Do you have any? Are you only recording your local mic on the MixPre, or are you recording your local mic in the computer as well?
No, just on the MixPre.
On the MixPre and in Riverside.
And in Riverside. Obviously. So the MixPre is going to have me on one track and you on the other. Normally, when I have co-hosts and a guest, they would all be together on the second track, recording on the MixPre. But of course, that's the backup. The default is to use the Riverside recordings, the local recordings. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm doing the same thing. I have my mic into my MixPre and into my iMac Pro. About 5 years old now, 4.5, 5 years old. And that's where we're connected through Riverside. So, All right. Well, let's talk about your monitors. You have Yamaha HS5s, and I know you don't have them where you are right now because you're not in your studio. But I'm not surprised you have monitors. And have you always had monitors?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I got those really early on.
Most podcasters do not have monitor speakers, right? Most podcasters just use headphones for everything, which is the best way to go for most people, because once you start using speakers in a room, that opens up a whole nother can of worms. So what's your experience been with the HS5s?
I love them. I positioned them actually based on some instruction from you. You probably don't remember, but I asked a long time ago about, what's the proper way to position these things? And you explained, I think, sort of an equilateral triangle.
Yep.
So that, the distance from you to the speakers is the same as the distance between the speakers. And I mix and master to those sounding good. I know some people take a different approach, and it's like, well, listen on earbuds, listen on headphones, listen on speakers. It's like, I just can't get into that. My approach is sort of like, okay, these are pretty decent. They're not like super high-end monitors by any means, but they're pretty good. And my feeling is that if I make the sound pretty good on those speakers, then that's all I need to do. If you have, I won't say crappy, but if you have headphones that have excessive bass because that's what and it doesn't sound good, my podcast doesn't sound good, that's your problem. That's the way I look at it. I'm not going to try to compensate for your poor choice of listening devices.
Yeah.
So I make them sound, my podcast sound good on those Yamahas, and the downside is, because I'm traveling so much and producing podcasts on the road so much now, then I have to fall back on my headphones, and it's not the same. I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like when I'm done mastering, I don't really know what it sounds like, because it doesn't sound like my monitors does.
You're describing a very common phenomena with engineers. Is wearing headphones is a very different listening experience than listening through monitor speakers, and just not even talking about the quality of the audio, the quality of the speakers, the quality of the headphones, nothing. Just the way that method of, and I bumped my mic stand again, sorry. Which both methods just provide a different listening experience. It's just different. And it's hard to explain, but I also feel the same. Like when I want to do anything, when I want to mix anything, that when I'm done, I'm going to know it's a great mix, I have to do it on my monitors. I can't do it on headphones. Now, I can reference headphones while I'm mixing it on my monitors. That's a great thing to do. Spend an hour, if you're mixing something, well, I'm mainly talking about music now, but it applies to podcast production as well. If you're mixing a podcast episode, mix it on your speakers for 30 minutes, then put on your headphones for 10 minutes. And then take off your headphones and go back to the speakers. And not even 10 minutes with headphones. You could just do probably literally 1 minute with headphones. You're just sort of referencing it quick, because it's a different perspective. You can hear different things for a minute and then go back to your speakers. And so that's the method a lot of music mixers take, and that's what a lot of professional podcast producers do as well.
Open back headphones or closed?
I'm not an expert on any of that, but definitely I think open backs are known to sound much more natural and replicate the frequencies much better. So, and of course there's semi-open, which is in between, right? So that's a whole. Now they're different. They sound different, but what the really expensive headphones are pretty much open back, I believe. I could be wrong.
Yeah, because I've been thinking about upgrading my headphones. Closed back for recording, because obviously I don't want any bleed into the microphone. But for mixing and all, I've been thinking about upgrading the microphones, the headphones.
Yeah, I mean, I have the Sennheiser HD650s, which I love. They're, I think, like maybe $300. So they're not, they're more expensive brand and model of headphone, they're great. Although what I'm wearing now is my AKG K240s, which are just like for me, those are my standard like $100 headphones that are really good for $100. I think they're semi-open. So, and they, I have like 5 pairs of these just for different reasons, especially mostly because when I had my in-person studio, I needed headphones for like 4 or 5 people. But yeah, right. So even $100 headphones they can provide a good listening experience, and not only the experience, but play back the frequencies in a flat way, so it doesn't accentuate the low end or the high end and all that stuff. So, Okay, so other software, you're using Riverside, you're using Hindenburg Journalist Pro. Now, is that where you do the meat and potatoes of your post production?
Yes, I love Hindenburg. I was attracted to it many years ago because its whole reason for being is spoken word,
right.
production.
Right.
And I don't need the fancy DAWs, all the capabilities that someone doing music production would make use of. But so Hindenburg I've loved Hindenburg. I originally started with the base level and then upgraded to the Pro, which I'm glad I did.
Nice.
But I also use that in conjunction with RX-8, which is there again. I'm probably only using a very small percentage of its capabilities, but the way it's segmented into
modules,
reverb reduction, or spoken word, noise reduction. Each of the different modules, you can tell, or I can tell what I want to do to the sound, and it's relatively easy to say, okay, well, I need to use this module, and it's worked really, really well. I probably use the reverb reduction pretty frequently. In this room where I am now, there's a little bit of reverb, and so I take a little bit out with that. I also do the phase correction. I know I get a lot of asymmetrical waveforms, and I know it doesn't really sound any different, but I don't know. It's sort of like my OCD rearing up, and I just can't stand looking at a waveform. So anyway, our RX will make the waveform symmetrical again, and so I use that all the time. But yeah, I like RX. It works well.
Yeah, RX is great. Wow. Yeah, I'm the same way with the symmetry as well. Like I fix the symmetry on every piece of audio I record and mix and master and everything.
Yeah. It's not an inexpensive piece of software. So if someone's not familiar with it, and you're taking notes, you may not be rushing right out to buy it after you see the price. But you do your students still get a discount? Yeah.
My students get a 50% discount on Isotope RX and Isotope Ozone, and also Neutron 3 as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Outstanding.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, and you're still using Blueberry and Libsyn.
Yep. Yes.
And for your website hosting, Bluehost and SiteGround.
Yeah. Between all of those, I really can't say any one of them is the winner and another one is not so great. They all work. They're all good. I tend to kind of spread things around. So, when I started a second podcast, I figured, well, okay, I'd been on Libsyn and still am. Let's try this Blueberry thing and see what that's all about. So I'll just try different things. That's why they're spread around.
Nice. All right. Well, let's move on to the next portion of our discussion, the Midsummer Podcast Evaluation. Because a fair bunch of podcasters take the summers off. And this is a great opportunity to reflect on everything you're doing. Like I said in the intro, this summer especially, I've kind of just let things go. But really over the last year, I haven't really interviewed a guest in a long time, Max. You're the first one in like, it's got to be like 9 months or something.
Yes. Wow.
But anyway, so let's reevaluate. You know, these are the dog days of summer. It's hot everywhere, and I hope everyone's doing well. But there are a lot of ways. Okay, so here's the premise of this. Let's for you, Max. You started your first show in 2009, right? 2008, which is actually that's right around when Joe Rogan started his show, I believe. Anyway, when you started it, you had certain things in mind. You had some goals, you had some ideas, you had a format of the show, you had all that stuff. And then you started your show. Then, over time, at certain times, you would reflect on things and say, you know what, that one segment we do where we do X, Y, and Z, yeah, I'm not feeling that anymore. Let's cut that out. Or, hey, I'm going to market my podcast on these other platforms. So my point here is, and I have a whole list of things to go through, just sort of reevaluating your own show. And again, going through this list right now on this episode, for you listening, you might not like have an amazing idea, or you might not get some clarity while you're listening to this, but guess what? Like tomorrow when you're taking a shower, something's going to come up and you're going to get ideas. You know how this works. So, all right, so let's talk about reevaluating our shows. So the overall effectiveness, that's one thing. Like when you start the show, you start any podcast show, it has to be effective, meaning you have to give some decent content and then people listen, and then more, your listenership grows at least a little bit, and and so like how effective is your show? So what do you say to that, Max, for you?
Yeah, I think the opening is really important, and it's changed for me over time. I think originally it took me a while to kind of get into the meat of the show, and I didn't really start off explaining what that episode was going to be about, because no one's looking at the show notes when they're listening. I mean, almost no one is. And so I did a couple of things. I thought about, I shortened the introductory music. I think in the early days, everybody was sort of enamored with, making a podcast and having all this music and, all this stuff. So I shortened that a lot. And I also started giving a quick summary of some of the high points of what the episode was about. My shows tend to be, they tend to cover more than one topic. We have lots of segments on different kinds of topics. It's not a singular, okay, today we're going to talk about this. There's lots of thises that we're going to talk about. So I give a quick rundown. And that was just something that, I don't know, I was just sort of thinking about the opening, getting it started, and wanting to get people engaged from the start, or at least know what they were getting into. If it turned out that, my summary of the show, and they say, one listener says, I'm not really interested in that, and I'm not going to listen to that episode, that's fine. I actually don't have any problem with that. I don't want to trick, listeners into
it's better.
Listening.
It's better for them if they don't want to hear the topic, don't listen. It's better.
Yeah. That's why it's sort of I just thought of this now. Along with that, I was trying to think about making it easier for listeners to get to the portions of the episode that they might be most interested in. So I started using chapters for the different segments.
Nice.
And that actually kind of adds a bit to the workflow. I mean, usually you want to shorten your workflow and look for ways to make things happen more quickly, and you don't really want to add additional tasks. But I thought, okay, so that might be worthwhile. I know a co-host or two said, yeah, but if they can skip around, they won't listen to the whole episode. And my view was, that's better. That's good. Make it as easy as possible for people to get to the content they like the most. Now, so I did all that. Now, at the same time, I have zero data on if that was effective at all. I don't know. But And I can't think of a way to tell.
That's interesting. If you're listening to this and you know how to, probably Daniel J. Lewis knows the answer to this, but if anyone knows how to evaluate if your chapter markers are helpful, then please in the comments or somewhere, Twitter, tweet at Max and I, please.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I'd love to know. But
that's part of the reason I've never implemented chapters, is because not only because of the work that it adds, and not only because it could even confuse listeners, they would just start jumping around and they wouldn't get the full experience, but also because there's, as far as I know, there's no way to track it if it's helpful or not. I guess, have any of your listeners told you that, hey, thanks for putting chapter markers in? No?
No.
Okay.
No feedback on chapters.
Okay.
And I've mentioned it a couple times, that we do have that functionality, the chapters in the episodes. But yeah, I've never heard from anybody. I should probably just ask them, because my listeners are fantastic. You ask a question or say, hey, tell me what anything like that. They're not shy about giving feedback. So
all right. Well,
I should just ask them.
That'd be cool if you did ask them. I'd be interested to hear the response.
Yeah.
I mean, because chapters are, because even on YouTube now, chapters are becoming more popular, right? Because, well, YouTube's different too. Like, especially if it's a news show and they're covering like 7 different news topics. It's some news topics you're not going to care about. Others you really want to know. So that's different. YouTube, it's different. For some reason, I feel it's different. Yeah. Maybe it's not.
But on the topic of reevaluating your show, I think this is a good area to think about some, which is how do you make, or what can you do to make it easier, more convenient for your audience to consume your content.
Right.
All
right, goals. So this is another topic, goals. Like when you start a podcast, you have goals. And so for me, for the Podcast Engineering Show, which you're listening to right now, my goal was to educate people on professional audio production, and also obviously sort of be marketing for my school, Podcast Engineering School. And so for me, nothing has changed in terms of goals. Has anything, and I wonder if you're listening to this, have your goals changed? And Max, how about you? Have your goals changed?
Oh, yeah, I would say so for sure.
Okay.
Because the original goal was have fun.
Cool.
That was it. Have fun. And what is this podcast thing? How do I make podcasts? What's the technology behind them? That's sort of the hacker in me was really curious about that. So I actually started with another guy. It was actually his idea. He contacted me. We've gone over this before, but he contacted me and says, hey, you want to co-host? I've got an idea. Do you want to co-host a podcast? And I said, I don't know anything about podcasts. And he said, you don't have to. He says, he'll take care of everything. All I had to do was get this software called Audacity and get a USB headset mic, and that's all I had to do. And so that's how it started, having fun. But sort of over the years, clarity developed in my mind as to what we were trying to accomplish with this, and it's really about the audience for me right now. Monetization was not a big driver. We do take donations, and we don't spend a lot of time begging our listeners for money, but that was never a big driver. But what we've found over the years is that we've really impacted the lives of our audience, sometimes in really profound ways. I mean, this is an example, and we've gotten this a lot, where someone said, I always thought about becoming a pilot, and I never thought I could do that, or I never thought I could afford that, or whatever the reasons are. And listening to you guys, I got all energized, and now I'm getting my check ride next week, and I'm going to get my private pilot's license, and things. We get stories like that all the time. So
cool.
The goal is more about getting people interested in aviation, in aspects of aviation that they didn't even know they might be interested in, but when they're exposed to it, it lights a spark or something. So that's one thing. There's also been a focus on youngsters, because if you look at the pilot population, two things stand out, and I'll just be kind of blunt. They're old and they're male. There are not that many young people getting into aviation these days, and the percentage of female pilots, it depends on the numbers you look at, is like 7%. That's it. So we actually try to create content targeted to those groups. I mean, the oldest guest we've ever had on Airplane Geeks was 90. The youngest guest we've ever had was 9. A 9-year-old.
Wow.
Super huge flight sim guy. Really, it was really fun. But so that's impacted our goals and what I'm trying to accomplish. Get more women involved, get more youngsters involved. So that's changed over time.
That's great. Yeah, evolution. So, all right. So again, if you're listening to this, have your goals changed? Think about it. Next thing is, one thing you can do in the dog days of summer is to focus on eliminating verbal crutches. This is something that most podcasters never do. They just they start off and they keep talking and they just keep saying and dumb and all that. And so one thing I did when I started podcasting, I'm curious of your experience, Max, but when I started podcasting, I immediately realized I was like saying and this and that. And I literally, and this is something you can do, anyone can do this, literally for about 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks, whatever, something like 2 or 3 weeks, just be very aware of any crutch word you use. So anytime you say in your mind, you should say, I just said I can't say that. If you focus like that for 2-3 weeks, like a hawk on your own mind, and just notice, you don't have to beat yourself up, but just notice, there's another there's another and then slowly you're about to say and then you don't say it, and then you just keep talking. And for me, 2 or 3 weeks of really focused attention on that, probably took care of 90% of my problem, and I've never had to think about it since. What's your experience been, Max?
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely agreed. That was also one of the, if you edit your own your own recording, pretty quickly what your verbal crutches are. And I did the same thing. The advice I got on the was to not be afraid to, first to be aware of them, as you pointed out, but also not be afraid to pause slightly instead of saying that And you can reduce it down to a pretty short pause. So it's not really even a pause. It's just a little bit of space. So I think I've over the years reduced the I still do ahs a lot, and I need to work on that. Another thing I'm trying to do is speak better English. See, there's an Uh-oh.
Yeah, just speak better. I totally get you on the English thing. But that, I don't know. For me, English and language has always been way more difficult than math and science. So language it's tougher for some people, including me.
Yeah, I've picked up the Connecticut accent, I think, over the years. One thing you have to be careful about is dropping T's. People drop T's in Connecticut like crazy, so I have to be very cognizant of that. Also, instead of saying to, I'll say tuh. Things like that. If you start to listen to yourself carefully, you really can identify lots of speech deficiencies or crutches or those kinds of things. And you might think it's a small thing, but I think it really does impact, maybe even subliminally, how you're perceived by your audience.
I agree 1,000%, and I also need to work on that. However, I will say I over the past 6 months, I started listening to this other podcast, which I just recently literally stopped listening to and deleted because they introduced some political and social stuff in there, which literally didn't belong. And I'm like, come on, guys. So I literally just deleted it. But in that show, one of the hosts, anytime he would say the word exactly, he would say exactly. Like he would put the T, specifically highlighting the T in exactly. And here's the thing. That's weird. That sounds weird. I don't care who you are. That's weird, right? Do you think that's weird, Max?
I do. And once you recognize that, you can't unhear it. You hear it every time.
So sometimes speaking perfect English is not, it makes it even weirder for the listener.
Well, that's true. Okay.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Anyway, all right. So equipment. Let's reevaluate equipment. Well, we've been talking a lot about equipment. You can sell old equipment, or you can even treat yourself to maybe that microphone you've always wanted kind of thing. Like some people think that if you want to energize, like I'm supposed to be putting out an episode every week, but I'm not. I'm being lazy. So let me buy a new microphone and that'll inspire me to do it every week. No. Maybe the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mostly agree. Okay. Getting a new microphone, it's one thing if there's some kind of deficiency with your microphone and that a different microphone would produce better quality or better sound or whatever. So that's one thing.
Right.
But also sometimes, because you see people, in a forum or something post, a better microphone is not going to make you sound better. Well, it might if it gives you confidence, right? If you buy that Neumann microphone, which is probably way more than you need, but it makes you feel good. It makes you feel professional. It makes you, feel in a way that you didn't with your $49 dynamic microphone. That can impact how you sound. It really can. Sometimes splurging and buying that nice piece of equipment just because you want to, an interface, an AD converter, you can spend anywhere from $50 to thousands and thousands of dollars. Is it going to make a huge difference in the sound? I don't know, but maybe you feel better about it, and that impacts your attitude towards podcasting.
Yeah, definitely the upgrading your MixPre is going to have less audible effect than, let's say, upgrading your microphone. Like getting a better mic it'll be a huge difference right off the bat. And I really like what you're saying about attitude, because one thing I pictured was like someone, let's say they don't even have a real mic. Let's say they're using an old USB headset with the little boom arm coming off the ear right in front of their mouth. And when you wear something like that, guess what you feel like? You feel like you're working in a call center. You feel like you're in a cubicle. I mean, I'm generalizing, obviously, but just to make this point. But if you buy an expensive condenser microphone, let's say you don't even have to spend that much. Even like a Rode NT1, which is an amazing microphone. Those things cost like $300 or something. But anyway, you get a nice large diaphragm condenser with the windscreen, and it's on a boom arm. Now you feel like you're a radio host. You feel like you're in a radio station. So the difference in attitude is, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Maybe another area for upgrades is in the studio itself. The sound qualities of the studio itself. One of the big changes that I made, which was a simple change, is I put a 1/2-inch thick pad under the rug in my studio.
Nice.
And I could instantly hear the difference in how it muted the room.
That's amazing.
That was a big one. And then I also hung some acoustic blankets in the room, which was big. I got actual acoustic blankets, not the moving blankets that probably work just as well. I don't know, but I splurged.
Yeah.
So upgrades to the recording environment can be, a beneficial thing.
Yeah, that's huge. That's not even on my list. I didn't even think of that, but that is, man, that's huge. All right, so another evaluating your show over the summer, you can build on what you're already doing by adding a new segment to your show. I think about new segments all the time. Like I'll just be walking down the street I don't often walk down streets, but when I'll just think of something like, oh, I could do this as a new segment of my show. You could cover new subject matter topics. Maybe when you started your podcast, you wanted to talk about A, B, and C, but maybe after 5 years, you want to introduce D, E, and F, like a whole nother topic that fits in with your show, obviously. You could publish in video format as well as audio. That's another thing you could add. And also maybe even publishing better show notes is something you could improve too.
That's one thing that I've done over the years is new segments, and they kind of come and go. An example is we had a guy from Australia that started writing in with some suggestions for Australian aviation news stories. And I got tired of, I think this is how this happened. This was a long time ago. I got tired of, reading what they wrote, and so we're a podcast, so you've got to record this. And so we started getting these recorded segments from him, and he started working with another guy. The two of them, if you don't know any Australians, they're like the best people in the world. I mean, maybe other than Canadians, they are just, these guys are hysterical, and they produced this segment for years for us. They went on to start their own podcast, and they've actually gotten into some air show announcing, and doing some other audio, professional audio things. So I mean, it was completely different. We've had another guy was sending in some history segments. He would write out the history of a particular airplane, for example. They were fascinating. The same thing. I don't want to read these. You need to record them, which he started doing. And actually, he ended up coming on the show as a co-host, and he's been a co-host now for years. So we're always looking for opportunities to add new segments, get new contributors to the show, so it's not just the same guys all the time.
Right. So speaking of covering different airplane models, have you ever done, this is a weird question, obviously, frankly, but have you ever done an episode discussing the types of aerial vehicles that have been cited or supposedly used in and around Area 51? Have you ever? Come on, Max. One time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. We've talked about that. We've talked about there in the Midwest. There were actually not too far from you. There were many reports of UFOs flying around that were seen by law enforcement agencies, multiple law enforcement agencies, other people that would have some kind of credibility. We'll talk about that too, but yeah, Area 51. I don't know if the aliens are still there, or reportedly they got moved to Chicago or someplace like that. But
I heard
it's
Utah.
fun.
Yeah.
It could be Utah.
Somewhere in Utah.
Could be. Yeah, but it's so. The serious answer is sometimes tongue in cheek can be something that you can add to the show, or something that's a little bit more entertaining. If your show is becoming kind of dry and it's the same format all the time, there may be opportunities to introduce something that's a little bit more on the entertainment side, not so serious perhaps. And that could be something that you do, especially if you're a solo podcaster, sure. But if you're like me and you utilize lots of co-hosts and contributors, you can find people that are interesting or characters in some way, and bring them in. Now, you don't want to, probably you don't want to completely change the character of your show. I'm not saying you go from a serious show that is targeted to business professionals and you're going to turn into a comedy show, but you might consider adding some element of that to sort of spice things up.
Yeah. And lighten things up. I think that's one of the takeaways I'm getting from what you just said is like just being a little, even not necessarily trying to be funny, but maybe just being like funny and goofy and a little weird, whimsical. But that all, you could boil all that down to like lightheartedness, like kind of just.
Yes.
So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there. Holy cow. And that's kind of what I always did with the Barry clips on my show, right? Like,
I love Barry. I know.
What does Barry have to do with podcast audio? Nothing, but I made it happen, right?
Yeah.
All right. So what else can we reevaluate this summer or at any time? It doesn't have to be this summer. We're just using it as an excuse. Marketing. So marketing your podcast show is one of those things that for me, I feel like it's my kryptonite, although I know it's not, but marketing, I just don't understand. I don't know what to do. And even when I think of new things to do, like, ooh, you should, TikTok's getting big. You should put out you should put your daily goodies out on TikTok. And it's like, yes, I could. But I don't know what good that's going to do. And then when it comes down to like implementing new marketing, it's again something that I will do for like 3 days and then I'm done. I don't do it anymore.
You will hear advice from a lot of people about being active in social media, like you say, TikTok or Instagram, or you need to have your podcast on YouTube, or all this stuff. And while that may be true for some people, I don't think that that's automatically the case. So a couple of thoughts. One is there are so many social media platforms out there that you cannot be good at all of them. You cannot be actively marketing what you do in all of them. It's too much, and you don't have the time to do that. So if you're going to do that, my advice is to see if you can figure out where does your audience hang out. Are they on Twitter? In the early days, almost all of my marketing was on Twitter. That's where the action was. People were. That's not the case any longer. But if you can identify which social media platform you do have a lot of folks in your target audience, then you can think about that and focus on it. Be good at it. Don't just flip out, hey, here's my latest episode. There's other tips and techniques for being effective on social media. And I think it's worth learning what those are. Another thought is that they've always said, I guess they still do, that the number one way that people find out about podcasts is word of mouth. And if that's true, then spending hours each day on Twitter, well, it may or may not help. But think about, how do you get your audience to be advocates for your podcast? How do you get them to do the advertising, do the marketing for you? And there's lots of ways to do that. I mean, there's merch, T-shirts or hats or buttons or pins or fridge magnets, things like that. Sometimes that works well. My crowd, the aviation crowd, loves T-shirts, and so T-shirts are a good way for us to do that.
Speaking of T-shirts, I'm wearing my Podfest T-shirt, which says "Ask me about my podcast," and I gotta say, I'm not kidding. When I wear this out in public, at least 50% of the time, someone will ask me about my podcast. They'll be like, "Oh, you have a podcast? What is it?" It's genius, actually, right?
Yeah. So there are lots of ways to market your podcast. I mean, for some folks, being active in a forum that's part of what your target audience participates in, that can be good. Just a variety of ways, but I just get the impression that many times people expend a lot of time and sometimes money on things that are not effective. So if you can focus in on what might be effective, that's what you want to do. And even more so, if you can figure out a way to measure the effectiveness, that's also good. And that goes back to my comment about chapters, right? I implemented chapters, but I have no idea if they're of value to my listeners.
You bring up a great point about marketing. Measuring the results of your marketing is huge. And I think I've said this before, but about a couple of years ago, I was looking for a marketing agency to help market my school because I don't know how to market I was looking for better ways to market podcast engineering school. And I talked to so many marketing companies, and literally none of them even called me back or gave me an estimate or a proposal or nothing. And it just, I don't know, there doesn't seem to be many marketing people or companies out there in the world who actually really know what they're doing. But maybe there are. Maybe they're the expensive ones. I don't know. But anyone on a lower level, smaller company or an individual doing, social media marketing, I have literally, I've never met one person ever that talked to me about marketing. And then I said, you know what? This person they really know what they're doing. I've never said that in my life. And maybe that's just me. Do you feel the same, Max, or different?
Well, is it that in part that they don't understand podcast marketing? Because I don't know. I think podcast marketing is not the exact same thing as social media marketing.
Right. Or marketing my school. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've just never heard even here's what it always comes down to. Oh, well, we can create some content and put it out on social media. Or we can put an ad out on Facebook. That's it.
That's not good.
I can do that. What you're this is supposed to be your profession.
Yeah. Another thing to consider too is enlisting your super fans to help with that. Now, this can be a two-edged sword, but most podcasts have what I would call super fans, who are people who are just really, really into it and would love the opportunity to help you. Mm-hmm. Even if in your case, or in other cases where, the podcast is part of a business, but there are still people and maybe there's somebody who knows marketing and knows podcasts enough that could volunteer to, to take on that role. It's something worth thinking about, I think.
Yeah, and the larger point you're making is not even just with marketing, but for any aspect of your show, you can engage your super fans and your super audience members.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Podfest was a couple months ago now, maybe 2-3 months ago now, and I learned more about how people are using NFTs in podcasting. That's a whole nother subject. Yeah. But a good NFTs.
One. NFTs. And cryptocurrency.
Yeah. Well, it's so early that the reason it doesn't make sense yet is because it's so early. When the time comes, it'll make perfect sense. Everyone will do it, and it'll be great. Everyone will love it. It's just so early. People don't understand it. Okay, so on the heels of marketing, one of the other things you can ponder about evaluating your show is, should you hire a virtual assistant? And this is another one where I've heard people say, I'll just hire a virtual assistant to post on Twitter every day and all this. And it's again, something I don't understand. I think in specific use cases and mostly for business, the business cycle, not marketing, just the actual business, getting business done. If you can use a VA for that would help because then you get the business done faster. But anyway, I've never hired a VA. I know some people are really high on that. What are your thoughts on a VA?
So I have a suggestion for someone who's interested in pursuing that or thinking about that. Many, many years ago, Cliff Ravenscraft hired a VA, and he added to his collection of podcasts. I think it was called the Virtual Assistant Podcast. But, search for Cliff Ravenscraft Virtual Assistant, and you'll probably find these old episodes. Now, they go back many, many years, but I think the advice and the information he provides he provided is still valid. I mean, the way I think of it anyway. That's what I would suggest, because he dove pretty deep into what do you want a virtual assistant to do? How do you pick one? How do you manage the relationship? All of those kind of things. It was a pretty good resource. I've never used one myself. There are certainly some tasks that could be outsourced to a VA. I think I've had like virtual assistants, maybe, in that I've had listeners for many years. I had one listener who also ended up becoming a co-host, do all the guest prep, meaning making the contacts with guests, giving them the background, talking to them about what the topics would be, taking them through that all critical sound check in advance, and all of that. Huge. Oh, that just lightened my workload significantly.
Wow.
When that was happening. So, I mean, it's the same kind of thing that maybe a virtual assistant could take on. But again, I think it needs to be somebody that understands podcasting and is compatible with the kind of relationship that you want to have with that person.
Right. Yeah. So, all right, there's one more on the list. I'm going to cover that in a second, but I just want to say, like, we're talking about all this stuff just to sort of spur on thoughts in your head about what you could do maybe better, what maybe you've been putting off hiring a VA for 7 years and you're like, you know what, I should just do it. And so anyway, hopefully these topics are good topics for you to think about. I definitely want to make sure time to program the minds of the listeners, Max. In the show notes, you'll find links to Max Flight's podcasts, the Airplane Geeks podcast and the UAV Digest. And you will go listen to Max Flight's podcasts.
Oh, thank you.
You are excited to listen to Max Flight's podcasts. Links in the description. Okay, so the last thing I want to cover is... when is it time to pack it in? Is this summer the time to pack it in and just stop doing your podcast? Like, when people talk about starting businesses, I've heard business consultants say forever, like, the first thing you need to do when you're starting a business is to come up with the exit strategy, especially if you have partners, right? Because
oh yeah, for sure.
You just have to know the exit strategy from the beginning, because that's part of the process, and then it just brings clarity. So for podcasters, most podcasters, they'll start their show and then they just fade away. They pod fade, and then they just stop doing their show. Then you have other guys like me this summer, other people like me this summer who just take 7 weeks off and don't put out an episode for 7 weeks, and then sometime later start putting out more episodes. But is there a time when you're done with your podcast? I don't know. Is that a silly question, Max?
No, because I thought about it in the past.
Yeah, me too.
As I was approaching the 500th episode of Airplane Geeks, which happened to coincide almost exactly with 10 years. In advance of that, I thought that I would quit after that. I figured, okay, it's been a great run. What a great time to go out on top. 500 episodes, 10 years. This is it. I'm going to get my life back. There's other things I want to do. And as it got closer and closer to that 500th episode, I started to think about how that would let down my co-hosts, how that would let down my audience. And I mean, in some ways, I kind of felt trapped into continuing. But on the other hand, it felt like I had a kind of an obligation.
Responsibility.
Which is, a responsibility. So, now it's up to over 700. So now I'm saying, at 1,000, I'll quit. But it's getting more. Another thing that's happened lately is, so I'm traveling a lot. I'm on the road a lot. I'm retired. I'm on the road a lot. I'm, getting out camping and seeing the country. And it's difficult to podcast when you do that. I had always been of the view that, every week we have a podcast. We took off Christmas, the holidays, 1 or 2 weeks out of the year we'd take off. But otherwise every week a podcast. The co-hosts and our audience knew that they were going to get one every Wednesday. But it's hard to do that when you're traveling a lot, and it's like, man. All right, we record on Mondays. That means I've got a plan to be in a hotel on Monday. So instead of camping on public land, I've got to go spend $150 so I can get a hotel room so I can record that starts to get kind of difficult. But I think it's the motivation is how, like I said before, is how it's impacted other people's lives. And it's just difficult to give that up. So if you're thinking about packing it in, really think about why you feel that way, maybe. It could be things out of your control. Mm. You now need to become the care provider for a family member, and that's going to take all of your time. Or you're going back to school, and you won't have time to, I don't know, whatever it might be. Right. But just think seriously about what is driving your thoughts to maybe stop podcasting. But also, along with that is, are you thinking about stopping podcasting in total? Or is it maybe just the end of life of that particular podcast? Maybe you've said everything you need to say. In fact, going back to Cliff Ravenscraft with his virtual assistant podcast, he did that for a couple of years, I guess, but stopped it because he didn't have anything more to say about it.
Right.
He had gone through it all. That's a really good reason to stop a podcast, not necessarily a good reason to stop podcasting. So maybe there's another topic or, a branch off of the podcast you have now that that might excite you and get your juices flowing again. So those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, interesting. And one other idea too is that instead of ending your show, let's say you started a show, you've been doing it for years, and instead of just ending it outright, you could sort of take a long pause and then come back 6 months later with like season 2 or, another season. There are no rules of how you need to publish and how you need to do it. So you could potentially just take some time off. You could tell the listeners, say, hey, look, I'm taking 6 months off. I'll be back in 6 months and whatever. So, so that's another idea. Or even just do a different show. Or like my show, for instance, you talk about Cliff on that one show, sort of feeling like he said everything there is to say. I kind of feel like that with my show in many ways, but it's not the same because there is new equipment coming out. There are new microphones. There are new updates to Riverside and Squadcast and these things. I'm teaching and commenting on a growing industry, so it's not dead. It's just it's continually changing. So I haven't said everything that I'm going to say, but maybe I should even change it up a little. Like we've been talking, come up with some new segments or something, or take time off. So yeah, a lot of options here. Right, Max?
And if you do a solo show, another thing to possibly consider is bring on a co-host, because that will change the dynamics significantly. I knew from the beginning I needed to go. I am super boring. I am a really boring person, and I can't even stand listening to only myself. I need co-hosts to, to round it out and to fill out the conversation. Other people are good at solo podcasts.
Yeah,
but that's another way you could change an element of your show is bring in a co-host. Now, of course, how you do that, who you pick, there's a whole discussion around that.
What mic they have.
Yes.
Yeah, lots of details. So that's cool. All right, well, also one thing you could do this year is decide that you want to become a professional podcast engineer or producer, and decide that you want to earn a great living producing podcasts for clients, and decide that you want to earn a great living working from home, working from anywhere, connecting with people over the internet and engineering sessions and mixing and mastering and becoming an audio what's the word?
Genius
or a giant.
Giant.
You can. And the first step might be to attend podcast engineering school, which is, I teach you how to do all that stuff. So I know, because the economy's changing, people, money is a bigger issue now than ever. It's like a lot of opportunity for people to learn how to produce audio professionally from home and earn a great living. And so if you have young people in your life, maybe nieces and nephews, 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 22-year-olds sitting in a basement at home, not doing anything, maybe show them podcast engineering school. So, all right, well, Matt, we're done, Max, but we're gonna do a special fun ending today.
Ooh.
It's called the hurry up ending. So we're gonna speed up the ending of the show when we're finally done. But anyway, I wanted to ask you, Max, before we do our hurry up ending, do you have any final words, any final thoughts, anything we haven't talked about you want to maybe throw out there?
Not really. We've covered a lot of ground, more than I expected we would, but it's been a blast to talk about these things. And if anybody is listening and wants to get in touch with me and talk about some of these things in more detail, that's perfectly fine. I have no problems with that.
Cool. Where should they go? By the way, all the links are in the show notes, but where should they go to contact you?
So the easiest thing to do is say, go to 30,000feet.com, all written out in words. There's a long history to that, and it's a really simple vanity page, but it's got all the ways you can contact me and the podcasts I do, and all of that.
Sweet.
There's a whole story behind that site, but that's for another time.
30,000feet.com.
.com.
Cool. All right. Well, let's do our hurry up ending. So, all right. Well, it's been great. Max, thanks. We got to go. All right. See you. Go.
Bye.
You done? Bye.
Yes. Bye. Thanks.
Thanks, Max. Okay. Bye.
All right. Do I get to say sound great?
Sound great. Oh, we didn't say sound great.
I want to scream sound great.
Okay.
That was the whole reason I agreed to do this.
Yeah. All right. So let's give it 3 seconds of silence and then hit me with a sound great.
Sound great!